Okay, so we're here at Triumph UK today to finally see the Triumph Trident in the flesh. We've got all the specs and details today, so we're going to go through them all and see if this bike can really compete with some of the other affordable middleweight nakeds like the MT-07, Z650 and the CB650R. We've seen the prototype, we've seen some spy shots as well released, but I think the best way to start this video is with some nice visuals of the bike in its production form.
In the second half of this video, I'll speak to Triumph's Chief Product Officer Steve Sargent about some of the thinking that's gone into the Trident. But first, let's dive into the specs of this awesome looking new bike from Triumph, starting with the engine. It'll be powered by a 660cc triple-cylinder engine, which is being developed specifically for this bike with 67 new components and its own dedicated tune. There's more about the exact changes in the interview later on in this video, but essentially Triumph have tried to maximise the benefits of the triple with its revvy top end versus a twin, yet a gutsier low and mid-range when set against an inline 4. The result is a peak power of 80 horsepower at 10,250 RPM and a peak torque of 64 Nm at 6,250 RPM. Triumph also point out that over 90% of its maximum torque is available across the majority of the rev range, which ought to make it a super easy bike to ride. Personally, I really like road bikes that operate within this power range, especially on our UK roads, which aren't necessarily the quickest or the most open. You can actually feel like you're giving them a bit of a rinse in rather than tickling the throttle of something with twice the power. In terms of how that compares to its rivals, as expected, the twin-cylinder bikes produce the least power, with the Trident in between them and the CB650R's inline 4. The MT-07 edges peak torque, but they're all pretty much in the same ballpark. On paper, the Honda looks like the best performer, but keep in mind that peak power is produced at 12,000 RPM to the Triumph's 10,250 and peak torque at 8,500 RPM versus 6,250. So you're really going to have to keep the CB's engine spinning to access those peak figures. Other key engine features on the Trident includes a 6-speed gearbox with ratios optimized specifically for this bike, as well as the final drive ratios with what looks like a pretty large rear sprocket for some snap off the line. It also gets a slip assist clutch, which will prevent the rear wheel from locking up when downshifting aggressively, whilst also resulting in a lighter feel at the lever. And there's an up and down quick shifter available as an option for clutchless gear shifts, and in my experience, Triumph's quick shifters are pretty damn good. It's also worth mentioning, given that Triumph will hope to attract new riders with this bike, that there's an A2 compliant accessory kit which will limit power to 47 horses at 8,750 RPM and torque to 51 Nm at 5,250 RPM. As usual, you can de-restrict this bike back to full power at a later date if you get your full license. In the chassis department, the Trident features a brand new tubular steel frame with a slightly more relaxed geometry than the likes of the Street Triple in order to suit its intended purpose and less experienced target audience. Of course, steel will add a little weight compared to the aluminium frame found on the Street Triple, but it helps to keep the cost down and it's still not a heavy bike at 189 kilograms wet. That's not quite as light as the MT-07, but on a par with the less powerful Z650 and substantially lighter than the CB650R. In terms of power to weight, on paper the Trident still outperforms the twins, but it's a little shy of the CB with that revvy inline 4 able to compensate for the extra weight. Suspension is provided by Showa with a non-adjustable separate function upside-down fork and a preload adjustable shock at the rear. The upside-downness of the forks is key here, with less unsprung weight and improved rigidity over traditional forks, both contributing to better performance. This puts it on a par with the CB650R and at an advantage over the other two bikes with their right way up forks. Where the Trident maybe lags a bit behind is in the braking department, and honestly from reading the whole spec sheet, this was the only potential weakness I could find. Whereas the CB uses 4-piston radially mounted Nissin calipers and the MT-07 uses 4 pots as well, the Trident has a pair of 2-piston Nissin calipers as with the Z650. There's a lot more to brake performance than the number of pistons though, and so I'll reserve judgment until I actually get to ride one. Some new lightweight 17-inch aluminium 5-spoke wheels shod with Michelin Road 5 tyres round out the list of equipment. As I've already said, Triumph have been clear about the fact that they're targeting new, younger, less experienced riders who were just as likely to be interested in town riding and commuting as they are a weekend countryside blast. As such, the seat height is pretty accessible at 805mm, although there's no low seat option at launch. The seat does, however, narrow towards the front, making it easier to get your feet down at a stop. In terms of passenger comfort, the pillion seat looks a reasonable size, and there will be grab rails as an optional extra. But should you want to ride solo, the passenger foot pegs can be removed for a cleaner look at the back end. Another area in which the Trident looks strong is the electronics. There's a ride-by-wire throttle which opens up 2 riding modes of road and rain, both of which affect the throttle map and traction control. Traction control is also switchable should you want to spin the back wheel up or pop a wheelie, and of course ABS is on hand, although this isn't switchable as safety regulations become stricter. It also gets a full LED 7-inch headlight which I think looks particularly good, and an LED taillight with a neat Triumph logo incorporated into it. Indicators are LED as well, and as standard, they're self-cancelling. For urban riding where junctions can come thick and fast, I think that it's an excellent safety feature, and it's great to see Triumph including it as standard. Whether you're a new rider or not, it's easy to leave an indicator on if you get distracted by busy traffic. But I think my favourite part of the Trident's electronics is the new multifunction dash. There's an inverted LCD display in the top half for the main riding readouts, and then a neat little TFT in the lower half. Installing the optional My Triumph module opens up Bluetooth connectivity for turn-by-turn navigation, GoPro control, and phone and music control using the dedicated buttons on the switchgear. That puts it head and shoulders above the rest of the market in terms of what the dash can do. Admittedly, the Bluetooth stuff is not standard fit, but there's no way to access similar features on the CB or the current iteration of the MT-07. And although the Z650 does come with a TFT screen with Bluetooth connectivity, it'll only allow you to handle calls and messages, not media nor navigation. And nav is the main thing that I think I would use it for, as it's neater to keep your phone in your pocket than it is to mount it on the bars, and it saves battery and keeps your phone out of harm's way. Now, whether this relatively modest screen size is enough to give you usable directions remains to be seen at the first ride, but I regularly use a Beeline Moto to navigate, which proves that the effectiveness is more in the design of the software than it is the screen size. It's also worth pointing out that with the inverted LCD display at the top, Honda had some problems with their similar dash with regards to readability in bright conditions. It's the most common gripe you'll see in reviews of the CB, and they had to address it for the new model year by adjusting the screen's angle in order to reduce glare. But the LCD section of the Trident's dash looked pretty punchy with good contrast, but again, another thing to check out once we've got the bike outside for a ride. In terms of colours, the Trident will be available in 4 schemes. There's a crystal white with black and red lines, and sapphire black with red and silver lines. Then there's a more premium version in matte jet black and silver ice, with a large Triumph logo on the tank that we've seen before on the Bond edition of the 1200 Scrambler. But the most punchy, and probably my favourite, is the silver ice with Diablo red bodywork for a hint of street tripleness, again with the big tank graphic. In my opinion, Triumph's fit and finish is really up there with the best, and I wasn't disappointed when I saw the Trident in the flesh. The choice of textures and colours is spot on, and there are plenty of little touches that make this bike look that extra bit more special, despite it being the most affordable bike in their range. I particularly like the Trident logos in the tank's knee cutouts, the Triumph logo in the taillight, and the logo in the filler cap too. As for the overall looks of the bike, I think they've really nailed it. I've got to say, I wasn't totally convinced when I first saw the concept bike in all white at the launch earlier this year. I thought it looked a little soft and rounded, but the finishes really sharpen it up, and especially in the photos of it on the road, it's a great looking bike. Probably the best of the bunch in that market, in fact, although I do like the CB650R as well. Let me know what you think of it though, down in the comments below. As always, there'll be a whole slew of accessories to choose from, with Triumph listing frame protectors, a body-coloured fly screen, aluminium belly pan, bar end mirrors, heated grips, an up and down quick shifter, luggage, a tyre pressure monitoring system, pillion grab handles, scrolling indicators, a USB charger for under the saddle, and an alarm and tracker. 45 dedicated accessories will be available in total, which you'll be able to see on the configurator on the Triumph website. But now for the all-important question, what is the price? The Trident will start at £7,195 on the road, with an extra £100 for the 2 premium paint finishes with the large Triumph logo on the tank. That's almost £1,000 cheaper than the Street Triple S, which was until now the lowest priced triple-cylinder Triumph at £8,100. It's on a par with the Honda at £7,199 and about £500 more than the Z650 and the MT-07, which both come in at around £6,700. But does that represent good value? On paper, it's certainly a better performer than the Z650, and it has superior suspension and electronics to the MT-07. The CB does give you more top-end power and possibly better braking for your money, but again lacks the sophisticated dash and mid-range grunt. So it really depends on what you want out of your bike, but it's certainly in the right ballpark. So those are the key specs, but whilst I was at the factory to see the bike, I also had the chance to speak to Steve Sargent, Chief Product Officer at Triumph, to find out more about the development of the Trident.
All right, so I'm here with Steve Sargent, Chief Product Officer, to ask a few questions about the new Triumph Trident. The first thing I wanted to ask is, it's going into a really competitive market, and you've been super explicit actually in the lead up to this about which kind of bikes it's going up against. The MT-07, really popular, really capable. What's the Trident going to bring to that market to set it apart and perhaps earn some of those sales?
Yeah, so I mean, you're right. It is a super competitive segment. You've got the MT-07 in there that's been a big seller, obviously. Yeah. You've got the Kawasaki Z650, you've got the Honda CB650R. Yeah. All of those bikes are real kind of global motorcycles, so they sell in markets all around the world. Europe's a big market for them, UK's a big market. America, Asia's a big market for these bikes. So for us, it's a super exciting segment to come into. Yeah. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to come in with something different. So what we offer in this segment compared to the competition, obviously, big talking point, we've got a triple engine. So you've got 2 bikes in the segment that are twins. Yeah. Well, what you normally get with a twin is you get good low down, you get good mid-range, but they tend to run out of steam a little bit when you get up to the top end. And then you've got the 4-cylinder in there. What you get with the 4-cylinder is low down, mid-range, it hasn't quite got so much. You have to rev it harder to get to the power, and then everything tends to be right at the top end. What we've got really with the triple is kind of the best of both worlds. What we've really focused on with this package is low down and in mid-range, really matching the twins in terms of the power and the torque and how linear that torque is, but maintaining that kind of top end performance that you'd expect out of a Triumph Triple. So I think as an engine package, real world performance on the road, you've probably got the best of all worlds.
Yeah, I can completely echo what you're saying about the CB as well. I borrowed that for a while, and it does rev out, and it is great on those bigger stretches of road, but most of my riding is around London and around town, and really I felt that kind of gutless feel at the lower revs, especially because I ride a street twin normally. Yeah, so that's perfect for pulling away from the lights. So I'm really looking forward to riding this one. The triple is a great strength of this bike, but obviously you've got a pretty stacked range of triple naked motorcycles, and certainly a question that's come up in my videos so far is like, is this just a street triple but built to a lower price point? How does it differ from the street triple, and how are you kind of like confident that it won't cannibalize the sales of something like the Street Triple S, for example? Yeah,
so I think if you look where the Street Triple sits within its segment, it's always been at the performance end of the naked bikes. So for me, a Street Triple is a performance naked. This bike is intended to be more of an all-rounder. So you talk about riding in town. Yeah. This bike is a superb bike for riding in town. The ergonomics are nice and relaxed. The handlebars are nice and upright. You've got plenty of leg room in the footrests, even though we've got quite a low seat height. Yeah. So this bike is focused on being an all-rounder. It's really aimed at people for whom it might be their first brand new big bike. So it might be somebody who's come into biking, they've passed their test. Maybe they've started off on a second-hand machine, but they're now looking for something where this is their first new big bike. They're looking for something that, they can do everything on it. So they can commute on it, they can ride with their mates at weekend. It's not intimidating, but, if you want to ride it hard, it's still rewarding.
Another question that came up a lot in the comments of those previous videos as well is like, is this just a 660 street triple engine transplanted over? You mentioned a lot of changes. I thought one of the major ones was the change to the bore and stroke. So even though it's the same capacity in total, you know, it's quite different. So how will that affect the ride once people manage to take it for a spin?
Yeah, I think people are quite surprised because they've heard that it's a 660, so they've kind of automatically said, well, they've just taken that engine and put it in this bike. Well, that's absolutely not what we've done. So, you know, this bike has got 67 new components in the engine, and some of those components are major components. So we have got a smaller bore, longer stroke engine. Again, a lot of that development work was based on making sure that we could match the twin cylinder bikes at the low down and in the mid range. The knock-ons to that, we've also developed new camshafts for this bike, so it's got completely different camshaft profiles compared to the street triple. We've got different input and output shafts on the gearbox. It's got a completely different crankshaft compared to the street triple. It's got a new selector drum in there, new selector forks. It's got a completely different airbox design. It's actually got a completely unique and different intake system on this bike compared to the street triple. So, you know, there are some shared components. Conrods, for example, are shared. Water pump, oil pump, I think is shared. But it's probably easier to list the things that are shared compared to the ones that have changed.
Just to touch on the visuals a little as well, because it's you know, it's quite different to the street triple, and we're very used to twin headlights on the Tiger, the Rocket, the Speed Triple, the Street Triple. This will be the only one possibly with a single headlight. There are some kind of moves away from some of the norms of your design language, I guess. So I guess what are some of the key visual features, and can you tell us a bit about the inspiration behind them?
I mean, we really did want to make a fresh take on you know, what a modern contemporary Triumph Roadster should look like. So we wanted to start with more of a blank sheet of paper. We wanted something fundamentally that looked like it was going to be fun. Fun to look at, fun to ride, super clean, smooth lines, nice, short, super clean back end. You know, these like really kind of super clean, elegant instrument pack on here. You know, and the single headlight was kind of all part of that. We just wanted something that kind of maintained that kind of simplicity around it and that sort of cleanliness around it. So the single headlight was kind of a shoe-in for me in terms of something that fitted the rest of the bike. But you know, we have retained some of the traditional features. So we've kept the knee indents on the tank, which is, you know, quite a Triumph signature. So there's elements on here that tell you it's a Triumph, but it's a new kind of Triumph. Yeah,
I mean, you do well to miss the giant Triumph logo as well.
Oh yeah. That's a giveaway.
So obviously we won't be riding it today, but hopefully, COVID allowing, we'll get to ride them in a month or so. So I guess what do you think we'll find are the kind of key takeaways from when we first swing a leg over it?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely going to love the engine. But you know, the way Triumph develops its chassis, we really focus on something that's kind of nice and neutral and confidence inspiring. You know, again, coming back to that ambition of getting new people onto a big bike, then, you know, having something that people feel comfortable on, that they feel that, you know, it goes exactly where they want it to go. But, you know, the other thing that we're really good at is making sure that when you do want to push on, the bike's nice and agile, it turns in nice. It feels like you can hold a tight line going through the corners if you want to. So, you know, you combine all those things together. It just comes back to that word fun, really. I think it's just a great fun bike to ride.
Really looking forward to riding it. Thanks so much for your time.
A quick thank you to Triumph for having me up at Hinckley. It was awesome to see the new bike in the flesh, as well as find out about some of the details behind it. I absolutely can't wait to find out how this bike rides in about a month's time, and I'll be sure to capture plenty of video on that day. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about the Trident in the comments below. Do you think it looks like a genuine competitor for the budget middleweights? And if not, which would be your pick? And as always, if you're new here and you want to see the first ride video as soon as it goes live, hit subscribe and I'll catch you next time.